Okay. All right. So I hit record and I'm going to be talking about scale and how to use your scale bar, which is essentially that ruler that everybody has bought, that triangular ruler. And we're asking you, especially for this assignment, to use a metric scale. Let me just make sure, I want to be sure it's being recorded. Give me a second here. Being recorded. So right here where we say the metric scale, this is what you will be using. So in terms of the metric scale, what you would want to do is you can see there's 1 to 100. And if you flip through that actual triangle, the white ruler, you'll see that there's 1 to 200, 1 to 300, 1 to 250, 1 to 400, and 1 to 500. Okay, so that's what's known as using the metric common scale. And so essentially what you would do, if you can see here where it says 3.8 meters, pretend this is, for example, the curve of a road, like from one edge of the road to the other edge of the road. And what you're asked to do is to measure in the plan that width of the road. What you would essentially do if it's at 1 to 100, you would use your 1 to 100 scale, and you would mark it up to the 0 from one end. And then you could see this is 3, right? This would be 5, right? 6, 7, 8. So that would be then 3.8 meters. So that is why you would use the scale bar. That allows you to actually use that to reference the measurement of that. Next, here, this is all from the Grant Reid book. So you could actually go in and take a look at the Grant Reid book, and you could follow along in the scale for more reference. As you could see, 1 to 10 and going all the way down to like 1 to 10,000. So if somebody sees 1 to 10, that means that it's a very highly detailed plan or a section of that place. Okay. So we as people, like we're considered 1 to 1 scale, right? So then 1 to 2 would be half the size and so on, right? And then 1 to 5 would be 1/5 and 1 to 10 would be 1/10 of that size. So as you keep going higher in number and scale, that's becoming like larger spaces. Okay, so maybe at 1 to 200, it'd be more of a smaller park. 1 to 100, something like Paley Park, that's a really, really small park. And then 1 to 500, it's starting to get to a more larger park. And then big, huge parks like 1 to 1,000 or 1 to 2,000. So the higher the number that you see, the more that is trying to represent, right? And usually when you're looking at, more district plans or neighborhood plans, those could be anywhere from 1 to 10,000 to 1 to 20,000. So the higher you go in number, the more that is trying to represent in terms of like the size and the area of that space. So I showed this in the other slide deck that I put up on CourseLink. So essentially what I'm showing here is the plan of Paley Park, right? And I think the librarian may have used this as an example for a case study. So it's not a park that's per se on the case study choice that you have, but it is a good example to take a look at. And this is actually going to be the site we're going to use to design at the end. And so first thing you would want to see for Paley Park, as we talked about on the very first day of class in this plan, you have a legend that's important. So it actually references what these actual items are onto the park. So this is the Honey Locust Grove. These are the kind of the 2 clubhouses. And then over here, again, these are the Honey Locust Groves. And then over here in the back is this waterfall. Okay, so the numbers actually reference to what the actual landscape elements are. And then another thing that's important, of course, is the north arrow. So you kind of have this plan oriented, and you can see this is where the sun is coming from and where the shade is going to be happening. And another really, really important thing is this scale reference bar, the scale bar. Okay, so that allows you to see that, this is a fairly small park because this line here represents 3 meters, right? And if I actually take that, like and I go across it, it will probably go across this whole park just roughly, if I'm guessing, 4 times, right? And so you could kind of use that as a guide right away to see how big that park is as an estimate. Okay, and then the next slide, I'll go into more detail and actually using a real scale, a bar, the ruler, to get a more accurate measurement. But in this case, you want to find a plan that actually has this reference. So you could use that in terms of making it smaller, the plan, or enlarging it if you need to a common scale. So the next one here is an example that I have. So if you have, like, for example, a current plan or an elevation that is at 1 to 200, and say you were asked by your employer or myself that we want that plan to be at 1 to 100. Basically, what we're trying to do is making that plan bigger, right? So maybe it's too small and you want to make it larger so it could fit on the piece of paper, the panel, or the board that you want to use. It's too small, for you to look at it from far away. So the best thing to do is perhaps enlarge it. So we're asking you to say, for example, put that current plan that's at 1 to 200 and make it at 1 to 100. What essentially it is doubling the size. So it's 2 over 1. Okay, so that's very, very simple math. So on a copier, you would make it 200%. You blow that up, and now that plan is at 1 to 100. Okay, but say, for example, you have a plan that's at 1 to 100, and you want to make it at 1 to 200 because, say, for example, it doesn't exactly fit on your board, right? So you need to kind of reduce that size. And so that will be now half the size. So now that will be 50% on a copier, right? So it's just basically simple math that what you're doing is, and what you're trying to do too is trying to put that plan or that section elevation to fit on a board that you're given. In this case, a 24 by 36 board. And these are some good reference numbers to take a look at. I always use like 1 foot equals 0.3048 meters, and 1 meter equals 3.281, or if you want, you can round it to 3.3 feet. So those are good things to do when you want to convert from foot to meters and then from meters to feet. And I actually have this little formula here in the center where it says converting feet to meters and meters to feet, just in case, for example, you find a plan that needs to be converted. First of all, that's the first step that you would want to do. Okay, so these are just some quick, notes on metric and imperial conversions. I would ask you, this is up on CourseLink, to go back and to take a look at that. Okay, so I'm going to bring up a next set of slides. Just stop sharing my screen here. Okay, so I'll just go into a little bit more detail again with that Paley Park as an example. Okay, so I put this up on CourseLink. So again, first thing you would want to do is to find a plan with an actual scale, a bar reference at the bottom of it. Okay, so as you can see, I blew this up, and you can see that's 3 meters in reference with that plan. And first thing you would want to do is get this scale ruler, and you would want to flip it around and see if there is one that is at a common scale, for example, that exactly matches that. Okay, so after flipping that around, I found that the 1 to 300 matches exactly. So as you can see, here's the 0. Okay, we line it up. And then there's 1, 2, 3. Okay, so now we know that this plan is at 1 to 300. So we have a scale. So that's the first thing you would want to see. Is you could see now we have a scale. Next thing so once you know that you have a scale, you could use that to actually measure the size of the park and all the elements within it. So what you would do, like we showed before, is you line up your 0 from one end and then see what it is at the other end. So you can see here, this is 5, that's 10, 11, 12. So now we know the width of Pili Park in this case is 12. And then again, we do the same thing. We put it at the end here and we go all the way to the end of the curve. And that you'll see is 31. Okay, so now we know what the size of this park is. And you could do that for all the elements. Okay, you could do that for the storage clubhouses here. You could do that for, the width of the stairs. So you use this as a tool to measure and as a ruler to measure the plan. And so you could actually see what the actual width of that park and those elements are. So we're going to take one. Okay, we're going to take an example. Say you're doing Parc André Citroën, which is in Paris. Again, this is a much larger park than Pili Park. And so you'll see that in the next slide that the scale bar will be much larger. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually search for a drawing of Pili Park, hopefully with a scale reference bar. So I did find one in a book. Okay. So here's the plan of Parc André Citroën, and I did find one here with an actual scale bar at the bottom. But, say, for example, you're flipping the scale bar and it doesn't match, right? It doesn't exactly match. Then what do you do, right? A lot of times that could happen. And say you want to, for example, we'll try making it at a 1 to 2,000 scale. Let's try it at a 1 to 2,000 scale. So let me go to the next slide here. So what I did is it's essentially this page, and I'm just kind of zooming in so you could see what I do at the 1 to 2,000. So I asked you, for example, to put this plan at 1 to 2,000. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip that ruler, that scale ruler, at my 1 to 2,000 scale. Okay, I'm going to line up the 0, and then I see, wow, the 50 doesn't match because the 50 is over here, right? So that will tell me that I need to expand or enlarge that line to get to here. And what do? Well, I'll use this just more as a kind of a reference, right? So right now this is 10, this is 20, and this is 30. This aligns roughly at the 30 mark, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide 50 over 30, and that gives me a 1.666. So what I'm going to do on a photocopier is I'm going to enlarge that at 166%. And when I enlarge this, along, of course, with the plan drawing, now my plan becomes at 1 to 2,000 scale. So I have a common scale, and then I could use this to measure all the elements within the park. Okay, so I did blow it up, right? I did this on a copier, and now if you could see, right, that 50 now, along with the plan, gets enlarged, right? And so I have it now at a perfect 1 to 2,000 scale, and I can now use that drawing to trace it and render it, and then put it on my board that's 24 by 36. But I have it at a common scale, and I could actually now use it as a measurement to match that. Okay. Yeah, so that's basically it with